Okay, colleagues, I'm going to call this meeting of Corporate Services to order. I'll just look to see if there's disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, I don't see any. We have the consent items before us, and I would just look to see if there's any items that colleagues would like to pull. Councillor Usher?
I'd like to pull 3, 7, and 9.
Okay, that's 3, 7, and 9. Any others, colleagues?
I have some questions on the development charges reports. If you want to pull them, you can.
Okay, 4 and 5. Okay. So that leaves 2 and 6 and 8. Can we do them all together?
Okay, I had a question about 8, but there's not one item there. I could just ask it.
Why don't we put them up on as a motion and then you can ask your question. Thanks. Okay, so let's have a motion for 2, 6, and 8, and then we'll deal with the other ones individually. Okay, Councillor Van Holst, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Chair, my question through you is about waiting areas. I guess this is the accessibility compliance report, and number 15 asks about, has your organization constructed any new or redeveloped existing waiting areas? And we had the new social services centers at the Galleria and out at London East, and I'm wondering if those qualified as new waiting areas. I was in them and thought they were quite nice. I wondered if they don't qualify in this report, or if they were just missed.
Through the chair, I have Chantal here, and she'll be able to answer more accurately. But it would appear that City Plaza is a new waiting area that was in that period, so it's a reasonable question to ask. So, Chantal, can you provide any further light, please?
Thank you, Bill, and through the chair, those the waiting areas in this question are actually fixed waiting areas, so where the seats are attached and fixed in position. We have not implemented any fixed waiting areas in the past since 2016. We actually went through our facilities department to double check this, and they've confirmed the same. So it's fixed queuing and fixed waiting areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on these 3 items, colleagues? If not, let's open up the vote. And we're voting. Councillor Park?
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 3, FCM Diverse Voices for Change update. Councillor Usher, I believe you pulled that. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a good report. I don't have a problem with it. I would like to suggest that item and the background material under 4, on page 4, that we do recognize that this information was based on the 2011 census. And since then, on October the 25th, new information came forward, and these numbers that were in that report has been updated, has been revised. The numbers are larger now. The proportion is still the same, pretty much the same. But I just want to bring that to your attention. At some point in time, when the Diverse Voices for Change committee meets, I'm going to ask them to bring that report up to date with respect to those numbers. For example, on a whole, it shows the visible minorities went up from 16.1% to 19.8%. And in general, everything else changed accordingly. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And I noticed that this is E is being referred to the governance working group. I think it's a good idea to send it there for them to bring it back to us. I would like to suggest, however, that under the discussions where we have recommendation, status, and associated cost, that in the past we've talked about this, and we talked that the city was going to take some bold steps in all of these scenarios. And I really haven't seen bold steps being taken. We write these things down on paper, but I think that this is very soft, the way this is written here. And this is not to be a criticism to anyone. I want to make sure that we understand that. I just think that every time we talk about this, we put it on paper, we soften the language, but then when we discuss it here, we talk about being bold. And it's time that we live up to our expectations and our promises, because we've got to do this. We have to say that we're going to do it and do it. And the way it's written here, I fear that you read it 2 weeks from now and it won't mean a whole lot. So I just want to make sure that the people who are going to be participating in this recognize that I, the community, and us around here expect bold steps. The other thing I want to bring up is on page 5, under provide alternative to online application forms. I hope that we recognize that the community centers are a good source of location to promote some of these things, this type of information, because a lot of the folks who we're referring to here, they do go to the community centers and they read the information at the community centers. And lastly, Mr. Chair, on page 6, under recommendation, midway, where it said just before systemic issues, inform people when they aren't appointed and why. I'm saying that we must not just tell them that they don't qualify, because even sometimes we tend to use a certain language when we're writing letters, and then the people who are reading it read it a whole different way. So they don't want to hear that they don't qualify. They wouldn't apply if they did not feel that they qualify. Give them another reason why, you know, even if it is the fact that there were many applications and your application was good, but and don't tell them that we're looking for the best and the brightest, because that's always an insult when it comes to the visible minorities and women and people with disability and so on. They do qualify, and some of them are the brightest and the best. They're just not given the position. So I think that we have to find the appropriate words to say to these folks when we write them back. So those are just my comments for now, and I just wanted to express them. Thank you.
Any other speakers on this one? Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to provide an idea. When Councillor Usher was talking about provide alternatives to online application forms, I wonder if there's been any progress or thought about having organizational champions external to the City of London. So say CCLC or other organizations like that could champion the vacancies on these committees and really inspire folks to move forward into these areas. Having the applications available through the clerk's office is great, but if we could have those available outside in the community with organizations that might dovetail into what we're trying to achieve here, I think that might be a way to go about it. Thank you.
I see Ms. Rowe wanting to respond, so go ahead.
Yes, on the top of page 6, you'll see that's what's intended. It says including communication points for existing diverse groups in the City of London. So it would be those such organizations that we would target.
Any other speakers on this one? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for recognizing me, or Mr. Presiding Officer. I agree with a lot of the points that Councillor Usher made. I would have liked to see a lot more specific statuses or action items in the report. So for example, I would like to see examples of undertake more consistent efforts for promotion, to use existing meetings and events to promote the governance bodies. I would have liked to have seen specific examples on what might be in the works or might be planned or thought of as ways to do some of these things, like do outreach and presentations to existing groups, and the status is staff will work with staff to identify potential audiences. So I would like to see the Diversity and Inclusion and Anti-Oppression Advisory Committee included in that as an organization or group to be reached out to. I have a number of notes of my own ideas on the kinds of things that we could be doing to ensure that the recommendations are followed through effectively and appropriately. And I don't mind that it's going to governance working group, but I don't also like how long these things take. This is something that, you know, different people in the community have been working on. They've provided their input on this. They know what they think should happen. They know what they think the city needs to do to open this up, to make this more accessible to people from diverse backgrounds. They know what some of the barriers are, including language, including intimidation, including where to go to get the information in the first place. So I just think we need to do, as Councillor Usher says, we need to be bold, but I think we need to do more. We need to do it faster, and we need to do it much more effectively.
Any other comments on this report, colleagues? Okay, if you will indulge me, I just have a few comments from the chair. So I think it's helpful to have an update, but when we asked for this kind of report back, we were talking about an implementation plan. And one of the pieces that I think is missing in the plan is sort of like when things are going to happen. And really we're working with a very short window of time. So if we're thinking about making changes in advance of the municipal election cycle and when the appointments to all these bodies happen, the clock is kind of ticking in terms of how much time we have to implement these things. Considering the scope, like there's a lot of recommendations and there's a limited amount of time, and it's something that is going through clerk's office, which frankly is very busy with all the other aspects of the election. You know, this is just something that is piling up. We have all the regular work of the election plus ranked ballots. Then we have recommendations for all of these things. And so I think being specific about what is going to happen and when it's going to happen it would be helpful. I know we're going to have another report on this. This is why I'm bringing it up, because, for example, looking at the voluntary disclosure, that seems like something we could do very easily. I understand we want to talk to legal, but we need to do that relatively quickly if we're going to change the form. Similarly, if we're going to actually change the form, we need to have a workshop about changing the form pretty far in advance of when we want to actually roll it out and start using it. So I think the next time we have a report on this issue, we for sure need to get into the when. And I know that some of the costs are still yet to be determined, but also really starting to understand what the costs are, because I think we had to prioritize some of these things. There's some things I think are really important to do in the lead up to the next round of appointments. Some other things maybe, you know, we can do half of them now and half of them in the lead up to the next round of appointments. I don't know if we can do them all, frankly, given the amount of time we have. So I wanted to raise that for my colleagues to consider. I think that's part of what's coming up with, you know, Councillor Usher said we might forget what's in here a couple weeks later because it's not clear when we're going to hear back on the next report and what the specific timelines are. And I don't know if the clerk wants to respond to that around the timelines, even when we're going to get the next report on this issue, but that would be helpful for me.
Through Mr. Chair, we are already working and have met with legal staff and should be reporting back to not the next governance working group, but the one after that. We're in the process of drafting the report on the voluntary disclosure. So we have been working on that. With respect to timelines, certainly we can, the next report back, we can provide some further detail on that. As you say, we're actually also busy trying to work on the election. So by working through the election will help us give some more definite timelines on some of these things because they kind of mesh together. So we are already working on this. We already generally each election year do reach out to the outside organizations. We have contacts. We're going to be working with Neighborhood and Children and Fire Services with their contacts as well, so that we can reach out to all of the groups that we should be reaching out to. And anyone that wants to give me some additional information, I'd be happy to take that and reach out to those people as well.
I got Councillor Cassidy and then Councillor Usher.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk, thank you for that. I also just wanted to highlight the diversity training. I know that we have our own diversity training for internal staff that we've been working on, and so there are a number of things that, as you mentioned, you're working with Neighborhood and Children and Family and Fire Services. So any place where you can piggyback on stuff that's already happening should speed things up.
Councillor Usher.
And to supplement that, because I was going to bring that up, one of the things that in C here, it says the mayor and the city clerk be authorized to enter into financial contribution agreement with FCM. And as far as I know, FCM is closing this program out by the middle of next year. So there's not a lot of time. It's a 3-year program, and I believe that it's only until the middle of 2018. So whatever we come up with and whatever contribution we want from FCM, whatever we're going to do, we should be acting fast so that we know what it is and we could get the appropriate contribution. Thank you.
Okay, the motion has been moved and seconded. Are there any amendments anybody would like to make at this point? I think it was helpful to hear from the clerk around the timeline. I'm not sure. I'd have to check my calendar when the next governance working group meeting is, and then the one after that to know what the timeline actually is. And I wonder if the clerk could just speak to sort of when roughly we're thinking about having that discussed at governance working group and when the next update on this issue was expected to come back.
With respect to any workshops, do we know if we have anything planned? I know that we're talking about election, but this is not just for election. This is for boards and commission and a whole lot of other things. What we're trying to do in this is to try to get women in general and women of minority groups to get involved with these type of things, get involved with the process, get involved with the municipal government and so on. So I want to be sure that we're moving on this and that it's not for election alone, that by next year we're going to be able to put out these workshops that Councillor Cassidy talked about. So I don't know if Rosanna or anybody else knows anything about timeline for these, whether they have those in mind as yet.
I'm going to try to, through you, Mr. Chair, answer this. There's two different things going on. There is the working group that was established through the FCM process, which is separate and continues to work on those. And then there's this aspect, which is linked to the election. Within my work program, the election and the appointments to boards and commissions are on the same work plan. They happen as part of the election process. So I apologize if I seem to be mashing them, but in my work plan, they're happening concurrently. So we do have a number of workshops and plans ready to deal with both the advisory boards and commissions appointments and the election process. So the next report will have more detail on that. I don't have the governance working group schedule in front of me. There is a meeting next week. It won't be at next week's meeting, but it would be the next one that's scheduled. And I don't have those dates in front of me, but it would be the next one after that.
And the next report on this issue that's going to come to corporate services, ballpark?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest it would be after the governance working group, so I would say January.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that people understand what the clerk just said, that both Councillor Cassidy and I are members of that committee. Yes, it's from the public, but I am there mostly because I'm on the Women's Committee for FCM, and Councillor Cassidy has been there right at the beginning working for the gender lens scenario. So we're both there. My concern is that when I go to FCM board meetings, and there are 5 cities involved with this, by the way, and we are one of them, and the cities are reporting on where they are and we are behind, that concerns me. So I just want to be ahead of them this time to say this is what we're doing. So that's why I'm so anxious for this to, that's one of the reasons why I'm anxious for it to get underway, but I'm also anxious for it to get underway because I'd like to see more participation from women in, it's not just city council, being a city councilor, but in decision-making and in contribution. You know, they could just belong to a committee or a working group or whatever. It's a matter of getting them feeling that they could participate and they could make a contribution in this community. So.
Okay, I don't have anyone else on the speakers list. Okay, let's call the vote.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, Councillor Morgan, I think we can do 4 and 5 together. If you have questions on those, go ahead.
Yes, just a couple of due diligence questions. First off, I appreciate the report and the level of detail in it. As always, I think it's always good to have lots of information, especially on something as important as development charges, since they allow us to do a lot of things. In the report, you talk about the residential, non-residential construction being generally below what was anticipated. And that the GMIS process has been used to kind of respond to those economic conditions. And then also that there's no changes needed before the 2019 DC study review. So are you confident, and this is kind of the due diligence question, that everything is fine, you know, in waiting for that sort of process for any sort of changes? Are we, despite, you know, the fallbacks, are we on pace? Because, you know, obviously that would be a big concern.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, to answer the question directly, yes, we are. We will note, as indicated in the report, that over the last few years, we have been significantly short on single-family residential in particular in terms of the revenues that we've been receiving. I definitely want to thank and recognize Adam Langner, who's one of my staff members. He's been doing a lot of work and put together this report, and greatly appreciate that. He's been drilling into this a bit more. What we've been seeing, though, especially this year, is we've really had a very strong year for single-family. So the revenue numbers that you're seeing here go till July 31st. Since then, we've had a very significant uptake. We've got draft projections that are coming forward that will actually be before you in December for the upcoming development charges background study that again is projecting some pretty healthy single family numbers as well. So with those combined and the efforts we undertook with the 2017 GMIS in particular, where we pushed off projects, it really did help, in particular the stormwater management reserve funds cash flow.
Sure, that's good to hear, and I certainly realize that these things kind of ebb and flow over a number of years, and I would have intuitively guessed what you had just said. Being a representative of Ward 7, I know that there are lots of single-family homes being built this year, and lots approved that have not been built. And I know that there's been a discussion with the chief building official about, you know, what we can do to ensure that those, you know, those developments come online sooner, as they may be approved, but they may not be actually under construction. And I think in my ward in particular, the completion of the Hyde Park Stormwater Management Pond in Foxfield obviously releases a lot of capacity up in that space. So it seems like our infrastructure projects are coming online, which will allow this to catch up. I just wanted to ask the question to make sure that you felt things were on track, and I appreciate the information about this year and what you project from that. So it sounds like it'll correct itself out in time for the 2019, at least to a certain degree.
Any other questions about the development charges rate monitoring or the annual report? Okay, seeing none, let's open the voting. Gonna move her in a seconder, sorry, first. Okay, that's open.
Councillor Usher? Motion carries 5-0.
Brings us to item number 7, the staff report on the master accommodation plan. I believe Councillor Usher, you pulled that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, one of the reasons I pull it is because I don't see a specific recommendation, so I just want to be sure from clerk that, from city staff, that the intention here is just to give us a report. You give us 3 options, but we are not making any decision on the options today. So what is the next step after this? Because I look at the 3 options, and is there going to be a lot of work involved with these 3 options? And then a report is going to come with the 3 options? Can you, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff?
Ms. Barbeau, go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, so we're reporting back on this to give a high-level overview for council as upon request to give a sense of where we're at in the process and what the timeline is that we're looking at this. So we are performing that analysis. That's basically status quo, we remain in this building versus all the way through to a new construction. So there are business cases and detailed information that we're currently reviewing to be able to assemble what those particular options and impacts would look like to bring forward to council.
And Mr. Chair, can, in option 3, can somebody enlighten me a little bit on what we mean by new greenfield construction? Is this that we're going to use up some greenfield sites and do some construction there? Or, I mean, it says consolidation of all civic administration space and seat of government with a high focus on customer service. I don't know if that just means, boom, everything will be here, or we're going to move around to sites that are, help me understand it a little.
Through the chair, really what that means is potential consolidation of all of the City of London services in one building. So obviously we would need to find a site that would accommodate that, where we could build a new city hall if that was a potential option. So that could mean a whole host of different things, but that's essentially what that's referring to.
So it's a dwarf sentence that means a giant information. So, okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Park. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my first question is, what is our restriction on timing on this? So you said that business cases were being analyzed. At what point is council going to be expected to need to start, narrowing down the options or considering the alternatives on this? And I guess I'm asking, what is the urgency of the space restriction, and when do we have to start making a decision on this by?
Through the chair, I'll start off, and if Mr. Hayward has anything to add. So essentially, I think the intent originally was to try to put something together for the 2020 multi-year budget. So we're looking right now at trying to analyze and have some options to review. So currently right now, where we need additional space, we are leasing. So we're managing as we go along, although we do have a life cycle renewal budget that if we should stay here, we will need to have a plan to start moving forward on looking at this building if we continue to stay here.
Just 2 other quick questions on this. And I do realize it's very preliminary, so I understand that maybe not all the answers are here yet. One is, what does the consultation with the public, our staff and say unions, associations look like? Because I see in a number of them that, there's a high focus on customer service. That to me says, we need to really understand our customers and the way that we provide services. And on that, how does this juxtapose with some of the decisions we've made to spread out our service points into the community, say with Ontario Works, service centers, because it talks a lot about the consolidation of staff. At the same time, we're sending some out. So maybe this is something you can answer yet, but what are the services that we're consolidating, and what are the ones that we're pushing out if our focus is on serving the customer? And if this is too preliminary, I mean, we can talk about it when it comes back up again. But those are the types of things that I'm thinking about on this.
I'll start off with this. This is basically a long-term plan for more the seat of government, so administration and some customer service functions. It does not include Ontario Works. There was a conscious decision by council to move those services out into the community, and obviously we have a unit in the downtown area as well to service the community in the downtown area. But basically what we're trying to do is lower our footprint overall, keep our energy costs down, bring in a good customer service model. And in some cases, that may warrant us going outside and looking at tacking onto some of the desks that we already have out in the OW sites as well, and creating more of a uniform kind of front counter that people can access in their own communities. We don't know that yet. We've got to do the analysis on that. That's all part of the Service London process and some of the other things that we're undertaking on customer service front. So that's still to be determined. The primary look at this and the urgency, I think, if anything, is that at some point we're going to have to start seriously investing in this building. And, you know, we have money set aside in the reserve fund. That's one of the reasons why your reserve funds are higher, because we have that building reserve fund. But when we start to actually work on this building, it's going to cost some money per floor. And we're probably going to have to start that work fairly soon, because we've been keeping it together pending this decision. And so we need to get that done. We also then need to make some choices about, well, what else are we going to do with that? So that's why this analysis is being done. And that's why it's being done in a way where we can make some decisions around the direction by the 2020 budget. Again, so we can plan out properly. Not that everything will be budgeted for in 2020, but at least we'll know where we're going. So that's really what we're looking at.
Just briefly, there was a question about public consultation and how people are going to be engaged in the process as you're working your way through.
So I just had a conversation in my office today about public consultation, not necessarily just on this, but in terms of the customer service piece and some opportunities around doing that, specifically, again, looking at how we roll out Service London and take it to the next level, and also some of the frankly, the extended hours discussion that we had earlier. So we're looking at how we deal with the public on that front. Now, does that address the broader community in terms of what they would want with City Hall? No, and that's something we'll need to talk about and take back.
Councillor Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questioning and comments were in line with where Councillor Morgan was going. Like, customers are your expertise in how you provide the service. So I'm glad to hear that those conversations will be having. I can't stress enough about how important that is, and also to engage the people that are providing that frontline service. They're also the experts. So making these decisions going forward, very glad to hear it'll be tied into the budget process. But from my perspective at this point, if we don't have that information from the public, we're not well informed going forward. Thank you.
Any other discussions on this report, colleagues? Councillor Usher, go ahead.
Just a quickie. I think about 4 years ago, we started a process of this nature, and I don't know where it stood. I believe that we hired a consultant, and we talk about pretty much the same thing. Are we going to start this from scratch, or whatever was done at that time, we're going to pick up on that and move on? Because I believe that these three options were also part of it. But I remember seeing a diagram just as an example of the ground floor spreading out to, it wasn't anything that was approved. It was just somebody's glassy eyes saying that this is what we could do. And I just wondered if any work was done at that time or that was stopped, because I know it came to us here at Council about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
Through the chair, there's been a number of pieces of work done on this over the years. Obviously, those have all been brought to council. If they involved the disposition of land or anything like that, they would have been done in camera. But basically, we are building on the work done in the past. You know, we've done building assessments and that type of thing. Some of those may have come to council already. But again, depending on what buildings we're looking at, some of them may have been in camera as well. But we'll be using all that information as we move forward.
Okay, I don't see any other speakers, so perhaps we can have voting opened.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 9. This is the report on an equity and inclusion lens for the development of policies Procedures and Programs. Councillor Usher, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, my comment is pretty much what I said with respect to item number 3. I think that we need to be bold with this. We need to be aggressive. We need to be proactive, and we need to get moving on this, because I am just a little bit, without stepping on anybody's, I'm just a little bit tired about us making promises about this type of subject and we don't take it anywhere. We come around the horseshoe and we talk about it and we say we are going to do this. And I've been here 17 years. And even before I came here, I've been talking about this, way back in the 1990s when I was chair of the Race Relations Advisory Committee. And to be honest with you, I don't see a lot of progress. And I think that about 18 months ago, we decided we're going to be bold, we're going to be aggressive with this. So I'm just hoping that that's what we're going to do. That's my position in this.
Councillor Park and then Mayor Brown.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. With this change to how we're looking at service delivery and how we're looking about everything in the corporation, I think that it's valuable to really broaden the scope. And I think that staff have done a good job outlining how this is going to be rolled out. I'm just curious to hear more about the training for staff members and how they're going to look at instances like diversity inclusion with those different gamuts of the lens. And I think that training is absolutely going to be critical going forward. So I'm just keen to hear a little bit more about that. Through the chair.
Thank you. I have Salia Khan here. I'll be able to answer more fully if I can't quite cover it. We've just completed the gender equity lens documents this year. We're about to roll it out. And the gender lens is on its own morphed to a gender equity lens. And we've done a lot of work with respect to equity in this document. The training on that is about to roll out. It's a layered training depending on what you do in the organization of policies. You're going to have much, if policy and procedure and program development is one of your things, then you're going to get a higher level of training than might be required elsewhere in the organization. I'd like to turn it to Salia to answer anything beyond that, if I could.
Bill, through the chair, in terms of the training for gender equity lens, as Bill's pointed out, this is in process, and we are going to be able to complete our commitment by the end of the year, as had been put in before. In terms of the training development around equity and inclusion lens, we're hoping to have a working group pulled together, which will incorporate different service areas so that we can actually have instances and examples, real life examples of how we can do things better and more equitable as we move along. So that's all due to be developed over the coming year.
Thank you. I think that information is quite helpful. Experiential learning is absolutely the key to opening up minds when helping and discussing, or any sort of help that you offer folks from a different place in life than you are. So I'm glad to hear that. I think that that's going to go a long way with our staff.
Mayor Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to spend my time speaking about this in I think a very celebratory way. To recognize that Councillor Usher is right. For decades, I think councils have been talking about this, but no council has come this far. And when I think about 7 years ago, when I arrived as a new councillor, we were not having conversations about gender lens. We were not having conversations about equity and inclusion lens, and we should have been. But this is something that this council has done right from the strategic plan on. And I think that we need to pause and recognize that this is a milestone. And it gets easier as well, because you can see the work for the gender lens took some time. And now that that work is done, this can be connected to that using a very similar practice. And it's easier for our organization to broaden its perspective and to serve our community, to serve all members of our community better. And so I want to just take a moment and recognize this milestone that this council has led us to, and thank staff for delivering on our direction as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing this roll out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, and thank you to the speakers before me. I have something, just a little bit of a different angle on this, and that is in the provision of the training, which I know is important. I would like to know if training modules will be developed for members of council as well.
I'm not sure if we've developed that or not, but I don't imagine that's a problem. Equity is equity, regardless of how you look at it. And so I'm sure that we would be happy to take away and figure out what we could do to assist council.
The reason why I raise it is because often when we develop training programs across the corporation, they're not always applicable to members of council because, you know, we're paid on a stipend, we're kind of employees, we're kind of not. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we signal that we would like to have training on some of this stuff. We would like to have modules that are options to us, even though we can't necessarily be compelled to show up and take them. I think, you know, the best we can do is agree as a council that we would like those options available, and then those members who want to participate certainly will have that as an option and a stream. I wanted to raise it with you because I don't know, it's not always appropriate to have members of council in some of the training sessions with staff. I don't know if that creates anything awkward, but as long as there is an option available to us on some of the corporate training that's happening, I think that there would be great value. At least I can speak for myself in taking some of that training.
Mr. Coxhead, go ahead.
Thank you. Just for clarity, we would have to determine where and when it would be appropriate, whether there is something special or modified for council, and or whether we could include you in regular sessions. But that would be something we could work together to determine over time.
Mr. Hayward.
Yeah, through the chair, we just recently had an employee update event, and any member of council could have attended that. Some members of council did attend that. And in that process, we introduced the aspects of diversity inclusion, and specifically in that one with respect to our Indigenous populations as well. So we are heavily going down that road in terms of trying to make sure we get some delivery. It was introduced through the employee update event and quite successfully well received by all the employees in the corporation. So, and I credit Mr. Coxhead and Ms. Khan for that. So.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you very much. And I have to say to Mr. Hayward that I heard a lot of good comments. I didn't know that we could attend. I thought that we were supposed to be out of it. I certainly would have attended, especially after hearing all the good comments from a lot of people in all sphere of the organization, including your story, by the way. I just wanted you to know that. Equity is equity. And one of the people that I respect all of you, but I do respect Mr. Coxhead, but I got to take, you know, equity is equity. Indeed, word, but there are lots of people. Everybody looks at equity differently, and there are some people who look at equity negatively. And that's part of the challenge that we have, because we don't read it all the same. And I'm not going to try to say how some people look at it, but the reason I'm saying that is because all of us need training, including myself, all of us, including this council, because we don't all see it exactly the same way. And I know that because I've experienced it. I'm not being negative in this way, because I think that all of us are trying for something good to come out of this. And I think that the staff also would like to do it, both the senior management as well as the people who are working on the floor. So I don't think that when it comes to training that we should take it lightly. We can always learn from it, but the best learning tool is experience, because that's where you begin to feel it, and he who feels it knows it. Thank you.
Thank you. And just briefly on this item, I don't have any other speakers on the list. I did want to say I think I agree with the mayor in the sense that we've made some good progress so far. We're on track on this item in the strategic plan. I know in our update in May, you know, we had developed the gender lens tool, and the training was scheduled to be rolling out, and then, you know, kind of aiming towards the end of the year to have that milestone completed. I'm glad to see that we're expanding it from that gender lens, which I think was an appropriate place to start in the first place. But I think to making an equity and inclusion lens is going to be better in the long run for the organization. So I'm glad that we're doing that. So we're on track really on the strategic plan side, and I think it's getting better over time, which is great. I do see Councillor Cassian. Sorry if I missed you earlier.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. I was waiting to catch your eye, but you were speaking. So I just want to say that I'm really happy to see where this is going. I'm the one that brought up gender lens in the first place, and I have no shame in saying that I was scared to death when I did that. It was one of the first things I did as a new councillor, and it was a really difficult debate. And so to see 3 years later where we are down the road, it's incredible. And the idea of training for council, I believe, is imperative. If we're talking about developing policies, this is on this floor where a lot of our policies start. And so for council to not undergo this kind of training would be a huge piece of the puzzle would be missing. So whether it's a special council training day that all councillors are invited to, or whether employees are comfortable mixing councillors in with employees for this training, I would be open to any and all options. And I think it's something that absolutely must take place. So, thanks.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much. I'm also going to say that I think the ability to participate in the training is valuable. Having attended, I guess, a couple training events and gone to the employee engagement, it's very helpful for a councillor to know what the staff is doing, what they're thinking, what they've learned. So we pass a motion like this, but then may not necessarily know how it rolled out. So by being able to see that, I think it helps us know what's happening in the culture of the corporation, which is a very important thing to many of us.
Okay, I have no further speakers. There's a recommendation before us. Part B is talking about training being provided. I just wonder if anyone wants to make any adjustments to that language to ask, look at how councillors can be involved in that. I just wonder if anyone on the committee has a suggestion on that front. I see a lot of nodding. Councillor Morgan?
I think Mr. Cox had made it fairly clear. If he sees value in us actually stating it, I think there would be value, because I think we're the only ones who can really, I don't want to say bind ourselves, but in direct our intent to have interest in training. Just the nature of the job puts us in this awkward position of not having to participate in some of the corporate training. So I think it would mean something for us to add a line in there about ensuring that members of council, and I see it's in there now, would be valuable. So as long as my colleagues are good with that, I'd be happy to make sure that happens.
Okay, it's just so everyone knows, the clerk has added in, after all applicable City of London employees, the words "and council members." So it's just been inserted. So I wonder if everyone just take a look at that language. Does that look fine? I see nodding. Great. Can I have a mover for that? Seconder. Any further discussion on that? Let's open the voting.
Motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to our items for direction. We have 3 appointments to fill vacancies on 3 different advisory committees. Well, one is the Town and Gown Committee. I wonder if we can do them all together? Yes. And I'll take a motion to that effect from Councillor Usher, it looks like, and a seconder for that. Just looking for a seconder for those appointments. There we go. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's just open the voting.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, that brings us to the often deferred, never duplicated proposed election sign bylaw. I wonder if any members of committee have any comments on the draft election sign bylaw. I think since we've dealt with it a number of times, we can dispense with the staff presentation, although if there are some limited comments, no, okay. We do also, and I want to deal with this off the top, have a delegation request from Sean Lewis. on this item. So I wonder, I'll just turn to colleagues to see how you want to proceed. Go ahead, Councillor Park.
I'll move that we hear the delegation.
Is there a seconder for that? Yeah, okay. Okay, that's up on the screen. It's moved and seconded. All those in favor, let's open the voting.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, Mr. Lewis, we can have you come down here if you want. I understand you might have some images.
That would be appreciated, as I have submitted some images to the clerk of the committee.
Okay, make your way down as quickly as you can.
I will quickly grab that elevator. Hopefully the new city hall has a faster one.
Go ahead, Mr. Lewis, if you just introduce yourself, give your address, and then keep your remarks to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will work through this as quickly as I possibly can. First of all, my name is Sean Lewis. My address is 67 Trapper Street, London, Ontario, Nancy 5 Whiskey, 6 Bravo 5. And it's a pleasure to appear before you here today. As most of you already know, I've worked in every election campaign in this city since 2003, at all 3 levels, municipal, provincial, and federal. I'm also fairly familiar with the concept of setbacks and height restrictions because I serve on your Committee of Adjustment. We deal with those things weekly. I want to address a couple of issues around the scope of this matter to begin with. First is the scope of the problem. And I think the reality is, if you ask yourself, in comparison to the number of electors who participate in campaigns, whether that's by voting, by putting a sign on their lawn, or volunteering on a campaign, when you compare those people to the number of complaints we receive, the problem around election signs is actually a relatively minor one. And I fear that what we have here in the proposed sign bylaw is akin to trying to perform brain surgery with a hammer. It's overkill, to be quite frank. The other issue in terms of scope is the amount of public participation that's happened. And I know that we all, as a community, not just members of council, have learned through the BRT discussion that public participation often has to require direct engagement. You have to go out and actually engage folks. As most of you know, I work for the Member of Parliament who's the senior representative in Parliament in this community. She's been there 12 years. And I can tell you that our federal district riding association was not engaged or informed of public participation meetings around this topic or invited to make submissions. Now, I know that they have a responsibility to try and get that information as well, but certainly that information or that opportunity was not conveyed clearly to them. So I think that if we're truly as the strategic plan goal says, leading in public service through open, accountable, and responsive government, there has to be a little bit more proactive engagement on this issue. Now, the particular problems. The single biggest grumbling that I've heard in campaigns for the last 14 years is the sign pollution, the number of signs clustered in a certain location. And I'm actually going to tell you that I think that the proposed draft bylaw has done one thing very well, and that's the requirement of the 10-meter separation between the same signs for any particular candidate. I have signs for most of you, souvenirs from campaigns, hanging in my garage. And I know that most of you did not, in fact, have rows of signs that were 3 or 4 feet apart along the roadways. Most of you were very respectful of that. Some candidates, unfortunately, are not, and the proposed division between signs for the same candidate is an excellent step in reducing sign pollution. But I think one of the things that we also need to consider is the province itself has stepped in and is reducing sign pollution by reducing the campaign period for municipal elections. Used to be you could file your papers on January 1, well, January 2, because on January 1 the clerk's office would be closed, but you could file your papers on the first business day of the year and get out and start putting up signs. We can't do that anymore. You have to wait till May. This bylaw would propose actually that you have to wait till July in some instances to do that, but I'll get to that in a moment. The province has already, by shortening the campaign period, reduced some of the sign pollution that the public will experience. Another particular problem, and I know that Councillor Usher touched on this when this issue was before council, and that's the sign height. So I want to draw your attention to section 4.4 of the proposed bylaw. The proposed height of 0.9 meters is essentially saying no signs other than lawn signs are going to be acceptable along roadways. I want to draw your attention to this. Both of these signs, one's an election sign, one's an issue sign, 94 centimeters, 96 centimeters. Yes, you will have a slight penetration into the ground. That's your maximum sign that you're allowing on a roadway under this proposed bylaw. The standard 48-inch by 32-inch larger sign that's often erected on T-bar or rebar that the city itself uses for its proposed land use change signs, the standard size for those T-bars, 6 feet. 6 feet in height. Allow a couple of inches penetration into the ground to hold them in place, but you're still talking about a sign that's well over the 0.9 meters that the proposed bylaw recommends, and this is a problem, folks. The second problem, or the third problem I should say, section 4.3, the proposed distance of 0.5 meters from the roadway, is also a problem. It eliminates the possibility for signs to be erected in a great number of locations because of development or topography that will prevent you from putting signs up. And again, I want to draw your attention, and I'm going to bring these photos up for you now. This was photos that I took yesterday to show you your possible land use change signs. My nephew was kind enough to come out and help me with this. We had a measuring tape to the edge of the roadway. Where he is standing is 16.4 feet or 5 meters. As you can see, your possible land use change sign is much closer than that. In fact, your possible land use change sign at that location is 2.6 meters. If we take a look at the next picture here, we're standing in Vimy Ridge Park. This sign, which was erected by the city, 3 meters. You can see where my nephew again is standing at 5 meters, a considerable distance there. This sign, obviously past his bedtime, so he's not in the photo, 12 feet from the roadway, or 3.6 meters. So in all of the locations where you have your land use signs or park signs, it averages out to about 3 meters of setback. And I will grant that the one that was at 2.6 may have just been the works department going, yeah, that's about 3 meters. Fair enough, that happens. And that will happen with volunteers in election campaigns. They're not out there with measuring tapes. The Fourth issue in this proposed bylaw, the timing prohibition in section 3.2 that prevents signs from being erected no earlier than the close of nominations, which would be July 27th. You're doing two things here. First, you're creating a perception of feeding the incumbent advantage, because as incumbents, of course, you all have supporters from previous campaigns that you can call up as soon as your nomination papers are filed and say, hey, can I put a sign on your lawn again? And most of your supporters will probably say yes, and that's great for you. But for the challengers, for the wards that are vacant, where people don't have the name recognition and don't have the contact lists, they're gonna have to go out and door knock first to get those sign locations. So you're putting them at a distinct advantage, but you're also creating a two-tiered rule here, because you're saying for federal and municipal, the rules are gonna be different. For provincial and municipal, the rules are gonna be different, because the bylaw says that federal and provincial candidates can start putting signs up the day that the writ is issued, or essentially the opening of the nomination period. Whereas for municipal candidates, you're saying the rule is the close of the nomination period. So you have created a difference where you're saying the federal and the provincial candidates are more important. They get their entire campaign period. Municipal candidates, I guess you're not as important. You have to wait until the nominations close before you can start to actually campaign in terms of your sign campaign. So I draw that inequity to your attention.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Fascinating point so far. You're at 8 minutes, so you need to wrap up.
I will do this very quickly then, Mr. Chair. I'll just put up the photo that shows the height, by the way, so you can see your land use sign. The measurements are up there. Not all of us have the luxury that Councillor Morgan has of having their mother live in their ward either. So your proposal to prohibit signs more than 50 meters outside the electoral district boundaries also creates a slight inequity. If my Aunt Sue, I don't have an Aunt Sue, so she's a hypothetical, but if she wanted to put my sign on her front lawn and I thought that was a good use of a sign location, that should be left up to the candidate to decide. The bylaw may not have intended to actually restrict that for family members, but it's not clear in there, so I ask you to consider that. Essentially, I'm asking you to look at 4 amendments to this bylaw. Amend section 4.4A and change the proposed height to 1.8 meters. This is not a number that's being pulled out of the air. This is a number that's consistent with T-bar and rebar posts that are used to post the 48-inch by 32-inch standard signs. 2, given the city's own placement of municipal signs for parks, land use changes, etc., amend section 4.3 to 3 meters, which would be consistent with the placement of other city signs and does not pose any safety or visibility hazards. 3, amend section 3.2, sections A and B to read earlier than the nomination papers are filed with the clerk as opposed to the close of nomination day, so that all candidates can begin campaigning at the beginning of the writ period. And then the 4th amendment to clarify that section 2.4, 2.5 prohibitions do not apply to the lawns of private home owners. And with that, I will wrap up my presentation. I will ensure that the clerk has a written copy of these notes for your review as well. And thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for that presentation, Mr. Lewis. I just look to members of the committee to weigh in on the proposed election sign bylaw. Councillor Usher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Mr. Lewis for coming here. He and I never talked about this. In fact, I don't know the last time I saw him, to be honest with you. But these are some of the these are some of the same things that I talked about the last time, because, you know, I have signs that are 2x2 on sticks. When I put them up, they're going to be they're 5-foot sticks. So about 8 inches of that go in the ground. So they're going to be about 4 feet, 4 inches. So because it's 2 feet and then they're 2 feet off the ground, but they're sticks. I got 4x4 signs, and they go in, I think it's 8-foot sticks. So about, I'll say 8 inches, a foot of that go into the ground, so that leaves me 7 feet. So I could appreciate where he's coming from with this, and I've been here the past few weeks talking about this, and I went along with what was there, and I said to myself, I'm going to have to buy new signs this time because I can't use these signs. But sometimes I think I'll just break the law, and then Mr. Maguire is gonna come and take my signs down and put it somewhere, and then he'll charge me. So, to make a long story short, I do agree with the dimensions that he gave, the 1.8 and the 1.8 meters and the, sorry, 1.8 what?
1.8.
Yeah, and 3
Huh?
meters. 1.8 high, 3 meters.
Yeah, okay, that's one. I do agree with those sizes. They still don't fit everything that I have, but nevertheless. With respect to I also agree with the terminology earlier than the nomination rather than the close of nomination, because I think that once people file papers, then they should be able to start doing what they want to do, campaigning. We've moved that down to a certain time in the year. And therefore we should be able to do it. The reason why I'm going to agree with this is because I don't really want to send this back. I think we've seen this thing enough, but I think that these are simple, straightforward recommendation. I don't know how we'll handle the fourth recommendation that you give. I'd have to read that. So I just wanted to make the comment that I fully agree with everything that he talked about here. Thank you.
Member Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you through you to Mr. Lewis for coming here to raising these four key points. Obviously, we want to get this right, and I think he's on track with 3 out of 4 of the recommendations that he's made. You know, the height restriction, I'll certainly support Councillor Usher's motion to change that to 1.8 meters. The 3 meters from the road suggestion, I'd certainly support that as well as having people with private property to have the sign of their choice on their private property, and I think we just need to make that clear so that it is clear for members of the public. What I don't think I can support, and in part respectfully, it's because of Mr. Lewis's argument about timing. Is that this is different than federal or provincial campaigns. And he's absolutely right, Chair. It is different than provincial or federal campaigns in that even with our truncated election process, we are still months and months and months longer than a provincial or federal writ. And so when we consider that at those levels of government, signs are up for, in the neighborhood of 5 weeks, and we're looking at, putting a restriction on end of July, August, September, October, I think that's reasonable. I think that it's a reasonable point, and so I'd ask that be called separately, because if someone brings forward that specific amendment, I'd vote against it.
Other speakers? Councillor Park and then Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. Through the chair to the clerk, recognizing that we don't have roads and transportation staff with us today. Oh, yeah, we do. Sorry. Long time no see. I'm very sorry. I'm so short in this monitor's. Anyway, I wonder if you could reiterate the comments that were made the last time, I believe it was the 4th time we talked about this bylaw, regarding why the recommendation for 5 meters from the road allowance.
Through the chair, when we looked at the distances, if you may recall, the streets bylaw actually prohibits anything obstructing the city's road allowance. So, and at intersections, we look for a 9-meter daylighting, and anything to be below 0.9 meter in that daylight. So that's where the 0.9 meter came from, is to keep that below the driver's eye height. Anything above that is obstructing a driver. So whether they're pulling out of a driveway or they're at an intersection, that can obstruct their visibility of people on the sidewalk, kids on their tricycles, or vehicles on the road. So that's where the 0.9 comes from. The daylighting was, if you recall, was much more difficult discussion as to how people would measure the daylight. So we came up with a compromise of 5 meters back from the edge of the road, which is roughly the length of a car. So anybody coming out of a driveway would be able to then see down the road clear, and then that additional back where it's just 0.9 meters. So the other thing I'd like to point out is when looking at those photographs, the signage, the land use signs and the park signs are all located on private property. They're not on the city's road allowance. Therefore, if those were election signs, as my interpretation, they wouldn't be violating the bylaw, because They're not on the city's road allowance.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I think it's important for the discussion that we're having today. I don't disagree with the increase to sign height, recognizing that some people have longer names than I do, and they might need signs to that size. But when it comes to the placement of signs on public property, I'm going to stay right where the staff recommendation was on that. We've heard very clearly the safety implications for pedestrians and for drivers alike. But thank you to Mr. Lewis for coming out and bringing those comments forward. It's good to have that expertise here.
Councillor Morgan.
So I'll start with a question, just so that our clerk can confirm. Private property. What parts of this actually applies to any sort of private property?
If you look at section 2 with the general prohibitions, those all apply to private property. So that's no person shall place or permit an election sign that is illuminated more than 6 square meters, interfere with the safe operation, as well as obstructing city maintenance operations. You can also see that the part where you cannot place or permit to be placed an election sign that is outside of the electoral ward, that is a general prohibition that would apply to private property, as well as in the 50 meters of any electoral district that is adjacent. That also applies to private property. And no person on a voting place, that applies to private property, and the logo trademark of the city, as well as timing. Timing applies to, it's a general prohibition, so it would apply to private property, save and except when it's on a campaign office. If it's on a campaign office, it would be permitted as soon as the candidate files their nomination with the clerk.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I know that it's come up a couple of times. I just think it's a good set the stage so we know kind of the areas that we're talking about when we talk about changing these restrictions. So I voted against this last time not because I had a problem with any of the individual possible changes that were contemplated, but with none of them being changed. I felt that overall the bylaw was too restrictive, providing disadvantages to people who are not incumbents looking to get their name out. I think if we make a couple of these changes and start to make the bylaw, more permissible, that I could get past that and support it. It'll depend on how many changes we actually make. I want to say on the 1.8 meters, I'm fine with that. I understand the 0.9 is to avoid the viewpoints of people driving. Quite frankly, the point of a sign is for people to be able to see it. So, that's how all the other signs in the cities work. We want people to see the signs. It doesn't really work for name recognition if everybody's looking over top of it. So I'm fine with that change. The 3 meters I'm also fine with. And the one thing that wasn't mentioned in the delegation was there's all sorts of stuff that are within 3 meters, or 5 meters, I should say, of the roadway. There's bus stops with advertising on them, whether they're the benches or the stand-up ones. There's utility boxes. Actually, we decorate and paint them now as part of, say, neighborhood decision-making projects. There's all sorts of things within that road allowance. And in the general prohibition, it says that no sign should be placed in an area that interferes with the safe operation of vehicular traffic or the safety of pedestrians. So it seems to me like we can be more permissive. If there's an area where it's causing a problem for vehicular traffic or pedestrian movements, that provision could be enforced through a complaint, and that particular sign could be removed. So when I'm done speaking, I would like confirmation of that to ensure that that's how it would actually work, because that general prohibition seems to comment on some of the safety aspects of vehicular movements and pedestrian movements. The timing, I kind of don't really see the timing as a big red herring here. Quite frankly, thinking back to all the municipal elections I've been involved in, there's one person who puts their signs up very early because they want to, the media to cover that there's a sign up really early and there's a picture of it. Quite frankly, most people wait until after Labor Day to put up their signs, because that's quite frankly when people stop, giving you flack for putting up signs early. So I'm not sure that the timing is really one that I'm stuck to. I don't think a couple of months is going to make a big difference because it's all in the summer anyways. And I'm not too worried about, where someone's family lives. I know that's a nice thing to do. It's private property, so I guess it wouldn't apply. You wouldn't be able to do it. Like was said, my family lives in my ward, so I guess maybe I have a biased perspective. But it's the first two that could allow me to switch towards supporting this bylaw, the 1.8 and the 3. The other ones, I'll leave to my colleagues to discuss, and I could go either way on them. I'm not sure I see those as paramount to the discussion.
Let's look for a guest to see if anybody has any other comments about the election sign bylaw before we start getting into potential motions. Councillor Reynolds, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, it seems to be coming towards some consensus. I think 3 meters we thought was fine previously. The reason we were looking for a change was just to deal with the corners. And I think that was the idea of 5 meters is almost there. If you're at a corner and your sign is 3 meters from either side, you're going to be 4.25 meters away from the actual corner. And if it's a different shape and if it's really pointy, then the 3 meters is going to push it back. So that's going to help with the visibility. I like the idea of us just saying that if it's creating a visibility problem, then that should be dealt with. But that's like anything. That's like a bush or a fence. I get complaints about visibility for numerous reasons, and then our traffic people go out and deal with that. The height, again, I think that's covered fine. If we say there's a visibility problem, it was mentioned that, you might not be able to see a pedestrian, but usually the signs are on the other side of the sidewalk. We're not hiding pedestrians. It's rare that I see those visibility problems there. So, and as far as the timing, one thing I would mention, that if we make it too short, it might be a little difficult for newcomers, and here's the reason: is if you're trying to be frugal with your campaign, you'll buy a number of signs, and then kind of see how it's going. And I know with my campaign, I bought a number of signs, and then later on bought another section. But if it's too short, you're going to have to decide right at the very beginning what you're going to do, because you won't get another chance to actually put in an order and have them come back, because they take a while to get. The last thing I'll say about signs in other wards, I know my parents put up a sign, and they don't live in my ward, and there was some confusion there. I know some of the neighbors thought, well, your son's running here. What's that about? So that could be a problem. Although I think, on the other hand, people could put up a sign on their lawn at any time saying, support my progeny, and that would be fine. So I guess I'm fine either way how that goes. But thank you. I look forward to hearing some motions.
Are there motions? Mayor Brown.
Just to get things moving, I'll move the amendment to 4.4A, and that's changing to 1.8 meters, and the amendment to 4.3, and that's the distance of 3 meters.
Let's get that up on the screen and see if there's a seconder, and then we'll debate that specifically.
I have a question.
Let's just see if there's a seconder.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So that's up, and let's have a mover. Is there a seconder? Okay, discussion on that. Councillor Usher.
To you, to the mover, to the mayor, the one on 4.4 with the 1.8 meters, that within 5 to 8 meters, is that the same as the 5 meter up in 4.3? No, look at A. Yeah. It says 0.9 meter when placed within 5 to 8 meters of the roadway. You don't want that 5 to change the tree? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mayor.
No, it's a good point that would need to be amended as well. This is 3 meters from the roadway. Yeah, nice catch.
Okay, other discussion on that?
What we're asking for is that in 4.4A, it says 1.8 meters placed within 3 to 8 meters of the roadway.
I think we're going to get that language changed, Councillor Usher. And I'm just looking for comments on this specific. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my comment would be that I remember seeing some very giant signs in the last campaign. So they were ones that were, almost 4 by 8 sheets of Coroplast, or they were rented signs that were high, much higher, I think, than 1.8. We saw in some cases signs stacked on top of each other.
Councillor Van Holst, I'm just going to interrupt. So the second provision in that same section, when they're more than 8 meters beyond from the road, they're allowed to be 4 meters high.
Okay, thank you. So it looked, I thought from the mayor's motion that we were just going to go with only the 3. Okay, that's all fine then, thank you.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I'm just looking for further comments. Okay, so I'm going to make a few from the chair. So I think this can work. What I'm worried about is the intersections and making sure that visibility is going to be good. I know that election candidates want people to be able to see their signs, so they put them up higher, and they want them to be in the view of the drivers. That's the whole problem from a safety perspective, is that they're in the view of the drivers. And not just for people who are traveling down the roadway, driving straight or looking to turn right or left, but people who are coming out of access points in those shopping centers and things like that. And that's where you can't see the pedestrian. So, from the roadway, sure, the sidewalk is before the signs. From the parking lots, the sidewalk is not before the signs. The sidewalk is after the signs. And so when you're coming out and you're turning right, and if you don't see someone coming, that's where you can get those collisions. Obviously, they're not as severe if you're gonna have somebody going down the roadway and they hit a pedestrian, that's gonna be worse. But I think that's where you have the turning movements happening, and that's where the risk is the highest. And so I think we need to be very cautious about that and think through how that can happen. I think one of the things that's to our advantage is that for the most part, people, when they're putting out signs, they don't put them really close to access points. They don't crowd them up really close to the entry points. I have seen some people do that, which those signs are not very nice, I would say. And I think we got to look at what's going to happen with a 3 meter setback from the roadway at an intersection, and whether that's really going to provide the kind of daylight triangle that needs to be there. Because if it's not, what's going to happen is that people are going to put these signs out, and then our staff are going to have to spend a lot of time and effort to take them away. And then people will put them out again, and then they'll take them away. And that's, we want to design the rules in a way that, will prevent that activity from happening, both the putting them up in the wrong place and the taking down, because that's just a waste of everybody's time. So, I would like to hear from our transportation staff around the 3 meter setback and what that would look like at an intersection, and whether it's going to create anywhere near the kind of daylight triangle we want at an intersection. Because this, I think, works really well. And in fact, a lot of the examples we had from Mr. Lewis's presentation were, this is a sign on the road when you're going straight, not a sign at an intersection. And I think those are the ones that are more problematic. And I'd just like to hear from our transportation staff about that, both with the height going up to 1.8 and also the 3 meter setback. I know there are trade-offs here, like we're working in a world of trade-offs, right? We're going to put signs up, they're going to cause visibility problems. It's just what kind of visibility problems we find acceptable, so.
Through the chair, I think what's been mentioned before, the intersections is a concern. Earlier versions of the bylaw looked at measuring site triangles, and if that may be one thing to consider, is to go back to measuring that site triangle. There's one of the things we had mulled around before in our parking or traffic and parking bylaw. We have a section about not parking within 20 meters of an intersection. Could use something similar, no signs within 20 meters of an intersection. That would give that clear view at an intersection. The difficulty that had been mentioned before is measuring that. I think there are ways to measure that without entering onto the road, but some of the volunteers may need a little bit of education. But I think you are quite right. If signs are being installed at the intersection, city staff will be out taking them down, and there will be just a cycle of the signs being installed and the city staff having to go and take them down because they are sightline issues. As I mentioned before, the 0.9 meter, where that comes from, it's the height of the driver's eye. Anything above that, even in that 3 to the 5 meter section, could be a problem. We have a number of times that we are out removing hedges or getting hedges cut down because of that same issue. So.
Okay, having heard that, go ahead, Councillor Park. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I just would like some clarification from staff. So the changes that are proposed on the floor here are in contravention of the sign bylaw, correct?
Through the chair, the streets bylaw prohibits, the installation of anything in the city's road allowance. Right, so the sign bylaw deals mostly with private property, but there are some provisions in there with signs that would encroach onto the city's road allowance.
Okay, I don't see any other comments, so we can pull that up.
Motion carries 3-2.
Okay, that's dealt with 2 items. I'll just look to see if there's any other motions from committee members. Okay, I don't see any. So that is going to be the last time we're dealing with the election sign bylaw for this cycle at Corporate Services Committee, right? I wasn't here last time. Hopefully that's a change of the dynamic. I'll just look for a motion then as amended, noting that we made the changes A and B for the election sign bylaw. Even better, we don't have to do that. So we now look for a motion to go into closed session. Just so members of the public know, we're going to go in closed session to deal with items C1 through C4. It could be some significant amount of time. We're probably going to adjourn from committee room 3. We'll go back into public session, but then we'll adjourn the meeting from the committee room. So just let you know that that's where we'll be adjourning. We won't be coming back into council chambers. Just need a seconder to go into closed session there, folks. Okay. All those in favor of going to closed session?
Councillor Park? Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, I'll see you in committee room 3.